Okay, so hopefully you have a good feel for the process. Let's dive into this specific test here. So this test is going through and it's saying, okay, something's going wrong here. Now there's a number of things that could be going wrong here. This is a very special test that's also going to help you see if your environment's set up correctly. There are some assignments through here where if you're at doing user input, I use a little specific Python mode that lets you just create user, command line user applications and I can test them. That's what this line of code here on line 12 does. And this is the line of code that might be problematic for some of you, particularly if you're on a Macintosh, a Mac OS. Because a Mac, this right here is not going to work because for whatever reason, some of the older versions of Python on some of the Macs requires you to put in Python 3 inside of here. So if you have Python here, you might need to change it. And this is for a lot of the exercises, the Python 3. So if I run on a Windows machine on Python 3, you can see I get this, your code's produce an error. Python was not found, run without arguments from the Microsoft Store, or disable this shortcut from setting menu, blah, 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 blah. So I got an error from Microsoft right here. So on the Windows version, it doesn't, Python 3 doesn't work. On the Mac version, it does. So you might have to change that. Um, this shows you that error popping up. It's also possible it runs without errors, but just no results are there. And again, you might need to tweak your tester. So it might run, but just not get the inputs because it has Python, it just runs the wrong version of Python. So you might need to go through and tweak this one or the other. So just something to be aware of for those Mac users or maybe occasional Windows users. You should be seeing the test fails or the test passes when it's all said and done. If you run this and that's not showing, that's a problem. So when I run it, you can see now, when I put it back to Python, it said did not find expected value in your output. Run before you code. That was the output that our code put out. Did you run before your code? I added code. So wait, well, what's expecting? Well, occasionally I try and print these out for the most part. In this case, I didn't because I want you to feel like this is something you shouldn't edit because you can't fix. I mean, if you fix the error down here, it's not going to work on Gradescope. You need to fix the error on your part of the code. But what I can do is like, okay, well, this is the expected value. So what I could do is I could say print expected, right? So I can add print lines anytime I want to. And this is the best tool you can use when you want to try and debug your code, is put a print line out there. So I'm going to run this again. So it was expecting I added code. And it found I added code. Well, it's right there, isn't it? Well, sometimes what your eyes see and what is printed out don't always match. Sometimes our eyes are forgiving. We're humans. We can see patterns, but we don't necessarily look at it a super detailed way. Now, this one's not too bad to see. You may or may not notice it, but in this I added code, the question mark isn't the problem. The problem is if you look at here, there's 1, 2 spaces, 1, 2 spaces. Here, there's 1 space in between. Now, it's an intentional problem. I put it like that on purpose to make us have to add spaces inside of there, just to show how something like white space, sometimes our eyes are not trained enough to pick it up until we code for a long time. So once I do that, you can see it says I added code. And then I passed the test. And so it also says run before I code. Did I run before I code? Yes, I did for sure. And then I can run this by hand. So for some of you, you might want to run this by hand instead of just relying on the test cases that run. Generally speaking, I give you these test cases because this is the exact same test case that runs on Gradescope. So when I come up here, I fix my code up here. I probably want to take out my debug line. Sometimes these debug lines can mess up Gradescope. Not always. For the most part, it's not a big problem. But every so often, if something fails, it's normally because you have too many debug lines inside of there, or the wrong type of debug lines, or the wrong character in a debug line, or something like that. So I take that out. I run it. You can see test passed. Because I have the right version of Python listed, I have it all working. It's all nice and ready to go. So now I can go back and resubmit it again. Maybe the first one was a basic cover sheet. Maybe I do need to do some updates. I don't have to do updates every single time. If I had a tiny error, I thought it was working, I fix it, just resubmit it. You don't have to update the cover sheet as long as it reflects the time and your lessons learned adequately. If you come back to it 7 days later, you should probably update your cover sheet. But if you come back to it 20 minutes later, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. But I can resubmit this here. So let me come back, go to my cover sheet, and I drag and drop that over. I'm going to go back here, a place to start. You can see my ledger still pretty small. It's smaller than the code still. It takes a lot of runs to get the ledger big, but there's more information about ledgers we're about to see. So I've submitted it. It's now running the test again. I'm waiting for it to come up. Still waiting. It takes a couple minutes. How are you doing today? I hope you're enjoying the start of the class. We'll just give it a second. I probably could pause, but I'm going to let it run. Okay, I did pause for a little bit. Didn't much wait. It only took about 20 seconds more after I paused. But here it came up again. And now notice I've passed the test. Now, notice version report 0 out of 0. Valid cover sheet 0 out of 0. These don't have points. It's valid or not based off the text, not off of this. I mean, 0 points out of 0 points. Not the end of the world. The one you want to check on is the ones down here. And then also over to the side, you can see over here. So at this point, you can see I've ran it 6 times now. Better. And notice in this tiny little example, 12 minutes of time. So if you come back and submit even this assignment and have less than 13 minutes inside of there, going on, it's possible, but you probably aren't looking through the video. You're not probably doing it in real time. You might be skipping forward a little bit. So don't skip forward, because notice here, I start my ledger, and between the first and second, there's one change that happened. I changed one line of code. And it took me 9 minutes and 28 seconds to change that one line of code. A little bit suspicious, but we know why, right? We watched this video. So I don't expect you to wait 9 minutes and 28 seconds to change that, but you might have several changes inside of there. And then 56 seconds later, I made one more change. And then 50 seconds later, I inserted an additional line. And then 54 seconds later, I changed a line. And then 47 seconds later, I deleted a line. So you watched these changes happen in real time. I can play back these changes because for every one of these reports inside of there, I have a version of the code before and after. And I have a tool that gives me a difference of every one of these code returned after. It's the same tool that generates this. I just don't print it all out right here. If you walk away for a long period of time, more than 60 minutes, it's going to say, okay, well, you probably didn't work on it for 60 minutes between. It's going to give you time away. And so that's what you're saying. The initial guess is how much time in 60-minute increments did you take? But you could walk away for a half an hour, so the second time is guessing 20-minute increments. And so that this second number might be much, much shorter. It won't be if you are, if you take a break, it'll be shorter, and it should be. If you take 35 minutes to write some code before you run the test again, first of all, don't do that. It's a bad idea. You should test frequently. I tend to, when I'm coding, I tend to run my test within probably on average about every 2 to 3 minutes. Faster than that when I'm close to an answer. A little bit slower when I'm doing some initial writing. But you can see my average here, 2 minutes and 9 seconds, and this was a silly little exercise. Really simple stuff that we did that was mostly all finished for you. But I want you to see what the nature of this is. So I want you to understand that if you try and fake it, number one, it's going to take a lot of time to fake it. And number two, it takes me a lot less time to detect it. And so if it comes back as similar to somebody else, I won't know that until after everything's done, when it's too late for you to redo the work and submit it for points. I have had people lose letter grades and possibly even fail the class because they copied early on and copied frequently and copied often and lost all the points at the end, because it's too much for my soul to constantly worry about whether you're cheating or not. I put that slide in there. Let me see if I still have it here. Let me bring it up here. This is the quote from Martin Luther here. It says, each betrayal begins with trust. Well, I trust you. I trust that you want to learn. I created this system because I believe that deep down you want to be a good coder. You wouldn't be taking these classes if you didn't want to be a good coder. And so I trust that you'll do it under the right circumstances. I also understand that sometimes the temptation overtakes you, particularly at the end, which is why I don't want to put a bunch of onerous restrictions on you. I want you to learn, but I also want you to be honest about the system. I want you to put in the time, put in the work, and then do well. All right, so that's kind of the system. This is kind of how to get started. Let me know if you have issues with this, but you absolutely must get this one working to show that you understand the system, you understand this process, and that you'll do it with integrity.